Hey y'all, it's Savannah and this is Savannah Says. So I'm here to talk about my fall favorites, and I understand that fall has already begun, but you know, there's never a wrong time to talk about things that inspire you about fall, right? I personally am a summer girl. I don't like being cold. I don't like when the weather turns. I like being hot. I always call myself a self-proclaimed lizard. I love sunbathing. I love sitting on rocks. I love being warmed from the outside in and the inside out by the sun. But you know, I can't have that all year round, especially where I live, unfortunately. So fall is the next best thing. You know, this fall's kind of janky. It kind of went from being 80 to 50, but you know what? I'll be mad about it later. Today I'm here to share with you my favorite books that I read pretty much like every year or every year-ish that remind me of fall. So yeah, this is not to say that these are like the things that I only read in fall, and this is not like the only, I guess, like fall video that I'm gonna do. So essentially these are books that I've either read every fall for years on end, or that remind me of fall that I haven't read in a while and maybe want to get back into, etc., etc. So let's get started. I feel like no one can be surprised that the OG Twilight has to be on this list now. I read Twilight to the point of like the paperback copy that I had was like tattered and torn when I was like in middle school and high school. This was my favorite book. I'm not gonna lie to you, this was my favorite book. I had not read it as an adult, and then in quarantine I tried to read it and I was like, it put me off reading. But you know, it's a new year and I want to revisit Twilight, and I love the movies. I watch the movies a little too regularly, so I don't see why I can't just read the book and enjoy the book. If you somehow have missed the Twilight phenomenon, Twilight is about a girl named Bella who's a teenager and she moves to Forks, Washington to be with her father. And while she's there, she meets this like elusive guy in her science class. His name is Edward Cullen, and his entire family's kind of elusive. They're kind of weird. Come to find out they're vampires. And I think this book is perfect for fall just because like Washington just seems dreary. Forks was always raining. It was cold. Bella is literally the quarantine icon. She stayed locked up in her house for months on end. That is what I want to do in the wintertime, in the fall time. Maybe this book is better for winter. I don't know, but it gives me fall vibes. And while I don't read this every year, I have read it enough to know that that is what it reminds me of. So Twilight. Now this next book, I'm just gonna PSA, it is Harry Potter, okay? And I know that I personally, and hopefully the rest of us, don't support J.K. Rowling. Like, I don't like her as a person. I don't support what she says. I don't believe in what she says. I don't need that kind of, or I don't support that type of like hate speech in my regular life. I don't believe in it. I don't want to support someone who believes in that type of thing. But I love Harry Potter, and I have to just like own that about myself. I wouldn't say that Harry Potter is my personality, but I do enjoy it, and I feel okay with like reading the books because this is quite literally the copy of the book that I had since I was in the first grade. Like, this is my first grade handwriting. Like, this book I've had for my entire life, and like it's so special to me, which we all know how Harry Potter like basically is the reason why I love fantasy and the reason why I love reading. Like, I've just had this book my entire life, and this book reminds me of fall, obviously, because like we all know you start school in September. They're at Hogwarts. It's magical, it's mystical, they're witches. It's just fall vibes, you know? And while I have not read Harry Potter in years and probably feel like the time has come for a new reread, I just want to make it clear that I do not support J.K. Rowling, but I do support Harry and his journey to defeat Voldemort. Next up, we have The Diviners by Libba Bray, and this is a historical fantasy YA about this girl named Evie, I think her name is, and she's basically like clairvoyant, I think is the word for it. So she can touch objects and like see the entire history of that object. And she ends up with like this group of friends. She ends up moving with her uncle in New York City in the 20s, and he owns like this museum of like weird things. Like, that's his job. And she ends up in this group of friends who all have their own powers or peculiarities, this word. And they have to defeat this evil guy. I forget his name. I forget a lot of things about this book, but what I do remember is that this book reminded me of fall like very heavily. It was very creepy. It was spooky. I've only ever read the first one, but I do want to read the rest of them. There's 4 books in the series, and this book was just really good. You know, like I remember giving it 5 stars. Like, the feeling that this book gave me was very fall, So I hope that this book also gives you the feeling of fall. Next is Ink and Bone by Rachel Kane. Now, I started reading this in the summertime, and because of the kind of person I am, I have not finished, but from what I have read, I do know that this book is a perfect book to read in the fall, okay? This book is like this kind of historical vibe, kind of dystopian vibe. You are in England, and you are basically in this world with the main character, Jess, and books are not allowed. You can't have books. All the books have to go through this place called the library, and the library basically kills people who are trying to steal knowledge, right? And everyone writes in these little journals, which are documented in the library, and that is how the library keeps track of you as a person. And so Jess is a part of this family who smuggles books, which is very illegal, and he ends up getting an apprenticeship at the library. And this book is just about him like understanding what that means for him as like a person and what he thought he knew about the library, and just like coming to terms with the fact that like his family is a smuggler. And I have not, the point at which I'm in the book, there's not been any like major twists, but I have greatly enjoyed it. This is like a 5-book series. Again, I love series. Sorry, y'all, I love them. But I think that if you want something that's sort of like the Atlas 6, but like actually they're studying and actually they're reading books, and it's like an adventure story that's not necessarily taking place in fall, but gives me the feeling of fall, I recommend this book. Next is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. Now, this is a YA fantasy, kind of a fantasy romance, but is very much a fantasy just with a romance. And it's about this girl named Karou, and she has this blue hair that grows from her scalp blue. She's very strange. She's always doing strange missions. She's always out of town. And it's like this deep lore about how this girl is like, she's been raised by like this demon king who's a chimera. And you know, it's hard to explain, but this book, like, it's so like magical and like mystical that it just made me feel fall energy. I don't know why, fall/winter energy. This book is, I gave every book in the series 5 stars. This is something that I think about like frequently. Like, I've only read it once, but this book was really good to me. Like, if you like fantasy, like actual fantasy, and not like, I say not like, but if you like fantasy that's very much just very like mystical and strong world building, I recommend this book. It's very good for a YA, especially these days. This book came out a couple years ago, but like, well, more than a couple. It came out a while ago, but it's a good book and I recommend that you read it. Next up is something that I always talk about, but it's the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. This first book is called Moon Called, and this is a urban fantasy series about this woman named Mercy Thompson, who is a coyote shifter, and she was raised by like the alpha of all alpha werewolves. So she's in close with werewolves. There's a werewolf pack that lives literally behind her house. And this book just gives me the feeling of fall, just because like when I first read the series, it was fall time, which the first reason, but also because there's like vampires, there's witches, there's warlocks, I think there's elves even, there's like trolls and stuff. There's just like so many like fairy tale like creatures in this series, and it's well done. It's good, it's exciting. Like, obviously in an urban fantasy series, there's always going to be like a trillion fucking books, and currently there's 13, and not every book is a winner, but like this one I gave 4 stars, and like for pretty much the majority of the series it was like 3.5 4-star reads, and one of them was a 5-star, I think, even. So like, I think if you're looking for an urban fantasy that's kind of short, you know, this book's only like, what? This book is not even 300 pages. If you're looking for something that's short and kind of, you know, fantastical but still set in the real world like urban fantasy usually is, I recommend Mercy Thompson. Next up, we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Now, this book, I guess you could argue, is more technically like a Halloween vibe book and not really a fall vibe book, but this book takes place in the fall, and it is I guess you could call it like a Gothic fiction with elements of horror, perhaps. And this book is about this girl, and she's really close with her cousin, and her cousin has been married away to this weird white family. They're Mexican, and her cousin's been married away to this weird family, and so she's been writing like strange letters back home, and her father, the main character's father, is like, hey, you gotta go see what's up with your cousin. Like, she's asking for you. Y'all were close. You need to go see what's up with her. And she goes to the cousin's house, and this family that she lives with is really fucking creepy. There's like themes of like eugenics in here. The house is alive. They have to like feed the house by like feeding it people. It's really fucking weird, but it's like a slow burn. atmospheric type of thing. And I read it in the fall time, so therefore you should read it as well. And lastly, we have Artemis Fowl by Ewan. I think how you say his name? Ewan Colfer. I'm not sure. You know, these Irish names are always crazy to pronounce. But this Artemis Fowl is something that like I have been weirdly into since I was like a child. Like Artemis Fowl came out in 2003. And when I tell you I have read this book probably at least 10 times, I don't know what it is, but like every year around this time I read Artemis Fowl, and I only ever read to the 4th book, and there's like 8 books in the series. But something about those first 4, man. Like this is a YA, I guess. It's not middle grade, I wouldn't say, but it's like a YA fantasy / sci-fi about this kid named Artemis Fowl. He's like 11 and his dad goes missing on this mission, and Artemis is determined to crack the code of the fairies, okay? This code that allegedly does not exist. Artemis cracks the code and learns how to communicate with fairies, and he threatens to like expose their entire existence. Fairies have their own world underground. They have like this whole universe, right, that humans are not aware of, and like the way that humans live on the planet affects the fairies as well. And that sounds so silly, but like this book is just so good to me. Like it's just cute. It's fun. It's cute. The characters are fun. I got connected to the characters like you do in a book that's good. I've never seen the movie, so I can't speak on the movie. I've heard the movie's not good, but the book is good. And if you've never read it, now's the time. It's short. Again, it's YA, basically middle grade. It came out for middle schoolers. So like, if you're into sci-fi, you're into fantasy, you don't mind middle grade, and you haven't read Artemis Fowl, give it a chance. So yeah, these are the books that I would read for like a fall vibe. These are my recommendations for you. I think that these books, because they are like special to me and books that I love, I hope that you also like them too. If you read any of these, let me know in the comments below. As always, if you have any more fall book recommendations, they can be spooky, they can be just fall themed, they can make you feel like fall, even if it takes place in the summer. I don't care. I love books. I love recommendations. Let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.